All right, I'm live. Give me just a second, y'all. Make sure I'm live anyway. Say live up there. Am I live? Okay. Peace, 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 peace. I am King Sosa. Yeah, we can take questions, man. We always take questions, even after the video, man. You can always if we always come back and check the chat. So you if you don't have if you think of a question after the video, just always put it back in the chat or hit us up on Facebook in the chat. Peace, Divine Giver. Peace, Jadar Spirit. What up, my brother? Peace, 8843 Gullah TV. We finna go ahead and I'm finna get ready to jump straight into it. First, I want to say ETM Hotep, Dual Nature, Alafia Ibe, Majube, Iba. Egungun Majube Iba Egungun Kiki, Egungun. I always have to give honors and praise to the ancestors, because without the ancestors, we wouldn't be here. We are our ancestors. Majube Olemare, Majube Oleran. I also want to give honors and homage to the creator. So I'm finna share my screen and we're gonna jump straight on into it with no delay. Yeah.
Call for the unity and the redemption of the African world. Salute them honorable marks. We are not ready to listen then. They might not have been ready then. There's wonder whether we are ready. Ain't no doubt about it. To listen. We ready, baby. Now. Let's go. Yeah. Flag fly high. Flag fly high. Flag fly high. Black kiss in the sky, breaking side to side. It's the flag fly high. Come on. Flag fly high. Flag fly high. Flag fly high. All these G's on the rise, all eyes will recognize the flag fly high. Hold it high. Let it fly. Rep those colors forever. Karma would never die. On the 90, the throne ready. Let's take a ride. Cash won't fix me and don't choose a side. This is the path for the warriors. Some travel yet still bad glorious. Black power represents us. Do we go rolling with Africa or against us? Flag fly high. Flag fly high. Flag fly high. Black kiss in the sky, breaking side to side. It's the flag fly high. Come on. Flag fly high. Flag fly high. Flag fly high. All the G's on the rise, all eyes will recognize the flag fly high. The red is for the blood. I got the best stock. The rest got stood. The black is for the gods, validating the elevator, holding the main charge. The green is for the cradle. Africa, everything first, the earth's navel. This excellency, put it together as a symbol of liberation. That's how we get the letters RBG. Flag fly high, flag fly high, flag fly high. Black kiss in the sky, breaking side to side. It's the flag fly high. Come on. Flag fly high, flag fly high, flag fly by design, we roll ready. Hard line, ain't no game for that red flame. Trip stage of that black bang. Revolution in my veins, till we free, I won't change. And you can count on that like an advocate. Celebrate the victories and the challenges. It's deeper than social media statuses. This lifestyle, elevation building practices. Yeah, fuck a flag fly high, flag fly high, flag fly high. Black kisses in the sky, waving side to side. It's the flag fly high. Flag fly high, flag fly high, flag fly high. RPGs on the line, all eyes go recognize the flag fly high. That red, 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 black, 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 green, green, green. RPG about that red, 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 black, 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 green, green, green. That RPG about that red, 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 that black, 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 that green, green, green. RPG about that red, 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 black, 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 green, green, green. That RPG, baby. RPG, baby. Fly high, my flag, fly high, my flag, fly high. Shout out to all my RPGs worldwide. Doing this thing, garbage style. You know what I'm talking about? Yeah. My flag, fly high, my flag, fly high. Come on. RPGs on the rise, all eyes gonna recognize the flag fly high.
All right. I forgot to check the volume on here. Hold on, y'all. Can y'all hear me out there?
Man, you just got some background noise.
Okay. Is that better? It's raining outside too. That might be that. What's the name you heard? I didn't know if I had unmuted my mic or what. I didn't want to stop. Okay. Okay. All right. Well, today presentation is called Seminole Freedmen / Black Seminole Scout, and this is just another installment from the two previous presentations I did. I've been talking about it, been spreading it, promoting it on Facebook. Who is the Gullah people, and who is the Gullah people? Who is the Gola People? Which was the first installment, and Black Seminoles who escaped North Carolina. Who escaped North Carolina and Georgia rice plantation, which was the second installment. This is the third installment, just picking up on the end of the Black Seminoles who left the Africans who left the South Carolina and Georgia rice plantation. So hopefully everybody checked out those two presentations. If you checked out those two presentations, you'll be up to speed on this presentation. Before I get started, this is also a phrase that we do. This is a phrase that was coined by my brother Sean Calfunny. This is something that we do before we do any presentation, because we are at war with our history, we are at war with our culture, we are at war with our traditions. So let's get it. Let's go to war. All right, this is a disclaimer. This is something I always do before I do any presentation. I have to put a disclaimer out there. I am not a teacher, but merely a student sharing information. And that information provided is for the educational purpose only. And if you are in doubt, do the research or have it verified by someone qualified. I reserve the right to change the focus of this presentation to shut down, sell, or to shut down, sell, or change the terms of the use at my own discretion. Our trademark, design rights, copyrights, residents' names, mottos, logos, avatars, and signals and marks used or cited by this website or its properties or respective owners. I reserve the right to add information as it comes available and or adapt changes, improve information as it comes available in the future. Inputs wanted, changes, additions, or deleted. This is my saying that I do. As I learn, we all learn. I think this is a important statement here. As we learn things, we should be able to share it with our family. We should be able to share it with our community, share it with our towns and so forth. I think this is the only way we'll be able to grow. We'll be able to progress. All right. I'm gonna go over a few lit terms before I get started. These just a few lit terms I want to, and I'm not saying nobody may not know what these terms mean, but this is just a few things because I'll be talking about the Indian Removal Act. I'll be talking about the manifest destiny. I'll be talking about another lit treaty. But real quick before I get into the presentation, the Indian Removal Act, 1830, signed into the laws 1830 by President Andrew Jackson. The Indian Removal Act, they were forced to assimilate it and concede to the U.S. laws and leave their homeland, and the Indian nation themselves were forced to move and ended up in Oklahoma. The 5 major tribes affected were the Cherokee, the Chickasaw, the Choctaw, the Creek, and the Seminole. I talked about these 4 so-called civilized tribes in the last presentation. You hear me say so-called civilized tribes. These were tribes that were that adopted the ideology, adopted the philosophy, adopted the bylaws, or integrated their bylaws, constitutions of the Europeans into their society. They married white women. They own slaves. Yes, and these Indians own slaves. They own our ancestors. Were very rude to them. Cruel to some tribes were a little bit more crueler than the other one. But this is the Indian Removal Act that was passed in 1833, where they started trying to push the Indians out of the territory into Oklahoma, where the Creek Nation, who was to me was the wickedest one, which was an amalgamation of a bunch of groups. But if you want more information on that, go back to the Black Seminoles, the Africans who escaped South Carolina and Georgia rice plantation presentation that I did. Manifest Destiny, a phrase coined in 1845. Yes, this phrase was coined by a journalist, an editor of, I think it was a Democratic Democratic something newspaper and the New York Times, Morning newspaper, where he coined the phrase manifest destiny, where he believed, and later on others believed, that it was destined by God for them to expand the United States territory, spread their religion, their policies, their politics, and so forth. Expressed by the philosophies that drove 19th century into the territory's expansion. Manifest Destiny held that the United States was destined by God. It advocated belief to expand in the dominion and spread democracy and capitalism across the entire North America continent. All right, this here is the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidegolo, if I said that right. February the 2nd, 1848. Again, I'm just trying to establish a few things before I get started with the presentation. So if you hear me talk about these things, you'll kind of be already up to speed on them. Following the defeat of the Mexican armies and the fall of the Mexican cities in September 1847, the Mexican government surrendered a peace of negotiation beginning. The war officially ended in February the 2nd of 1848, signed in Mexico and the treaties of Guadalupe Hidalgo. The treaty added an additional 525,000 square miles to the United States territory, including the lands that make up all parts of the present-day Arizona, California, Colorado, Nevada, New Mexico, Utah, Wyoming. Excuse me. Mexico was gave up in the claims to the Texas, recognizing the Rio Grande as American southern boundaries. In return, the United States paid $15 million, agreed to settle all claims in the U.S. citizens against the Mexico. So in this presentation, I'm going to be talking about further events before we even get to and reiterating on a few things from the first two presentations that I did. I may be reiterating on a few things. And we'll be talking about the Texas Revolution, Mexico independence, the Mexican-American War, Spain owning Texas at one time. We know Texas was Mexico. Andrew Jackson trying to buy Texas, some part of California and New Mexico from the government of Mexico. We're going to get into all of that before we get into who the Scouts is, even though we should already know who the Scouts, the Black Scouts, or the Black Seminole Scouts, or the Seminole Freedmen are, if you looked at the first two videos. Now, the Texas Indian War. The Texas Indian War was a series of 19 series conflict between settlers in the Texas and Southern Plain Indians. These conflicts began when the first wave of European American settlers moved into Spanish Texas. Like I said earlier, Spain owned Texas at this particular time. Hold on. Spain owned Texas at this particular time. To continue through the Texas time as a part of Mexico. When more Europeans and Anglo-Americans arrived, the subsequent declarations of the independence by the Republic in Texas. The conflict did not end until the 30 years after Texas joined the United States. Although several Indian tribes occupied the territory in the area, the preeminent nation of the Comanches, known as the Lords of the Plains, who were from, they say, the Great Plains and from the Canada Paris. The territories, Spanish, the Mexicans, and finally the Texans. The conflict lasted from 1820, just before the Mexican gained independence from Spain, until 1875. So the Mexico ended up getting their independence from Spain, and then certain things happened while Spain was there. You start to see Europeans come in. This is before the United States. This is before Texas became a state or a territory of the United States at this time. And you had different groups of Europeans coming in. They started calling themselves the Texans, and then the Mexicans, which we know Mexico was Texas. You know, when you talk about Oklahoma, you talk about Texas, you talk about Arizona, you talk about Nevada, you talk about Colorado, you talk about New Mexico, a few other places that I'm mixing. This was all Mexico at one time. And the Mexicans won. The Mexican government won their independence back from Spain at that time, when Spain was in the Spain War with the Mexicans, with the Mexican government. They won their independence back. It was a surge of Europeans coming in at that time, and then the Mexicans, they passed a law stopping European immigrants from coming into Texas, or what we would call Mexico. These conflicts lasted from 1820, just before Mexican gained independence from Spain, until 1875, when the last free band of Plain Indians, the Camachos, led by Quijada warrior Quijada Parker, surrendered and moved to a Fort Sill reservation in Oklahoma. The half-century struggles between the Plains tribes in Texas became particularly intense after the Spanish and the Mexicans left power to Texas Americans in the United States opposed to the tribes. Their wars of the Plains Indians was characterized by deep animus slaughter on both sides, and in the end, the total conquest of the Indians. Some Gullah slaves managed to escape from the coastal South Carolina and Georgia south into Florida Peninsula. In the 18th century, Florida was vast tropical wilderness covered with jungles and malarial-ridden swamps. The Spanish claimed Florida, but they used it only as a buffer between the British colony and their own settlement territory farther and south. Bryson, son, excuse me, y'all. Son, I'm live. You're going to have to be quiet. All right. Now, people who followed who was the Gullah people and who was the Gullah people, we know that the Gullah people are the people that came from Sierra Leone and came from Liberia. Those Gullah people are who they call the Angolians, who came from Angola, or what I would like to refer to as Ndongo. And the Gullah people and the Kisi people migrated out of Central Africa, and they went into the Ivory Coast, they went into Liberia, they went into Sierra Leone, and Sierra Leone and Liberia was a swampy place. This is where the Gullah people, the Kisi people, the Bassa people, the Kono people, the Timni people, the Mindi people, they all inhabited those areas, and a lot of those tribes amalgamated with each other tribes because of the smaller tribes. The Gullah people, as other ones, they were cultivating rice in these swampy areas in Liberia and Sierra Leone, and South Carolina, North Carolina, not South Carolina and Georgia, excuse me. In this area, they had these swampy areas and so forth, and they target the Gullah people, also the Mindi and other ethnic groups, and took them to the Bunks Island and brought them over here to South Carolina and Georgia. I showed you in the first presentation some of the bills of sales, and particularly the bills of sale these slaves were coming from Liberia and Sierra Leone. And they was put in these areas to cultivate rice. And as they cultivated the rice, they was on the plantation. The owner, the slave master, wasn't on the plantation due to the swampy area of malaria and other different diseases that our ancestors was already immune to for being in South Carolina and Liberia. And at this time, Spain also owned Florida. And as Spain owned Florida, Florida became a safe haven, or became a free town for the people, the Gullah people, who became the Gullah people. And the Gullah people also escaped and went into, and I'm not finna go into, like I'm saying, go into the whole thing. You can go to the presentation to look, but just trying to get people a little bit up to speed of what this slide is talking about. And Britain and Spain fought for the territory. Spain owned it, and they fought for the territory. They made it a free town for the slaves, for our ancestors. So our ancestors escaped from Georgia, South Carolina, went into Florida. Some of the other native, so-called Native American Indians, they also retreated from fighting with the European and went into Florida area at that time also. The colonies, their own settlement territories farther south. They wanted to keep Florida as a dangerous wilderness frontier, so they offered a refuge to the escape slaves and renegade Indians from the neighboring South Carolina and Georgia. Black Seminoles, Gullahs who escaped from slavery. The Black Seminoles are a small offshoot of Gullahs who escaped from the rice plantation in the South Carolina and Georgia. Iterating. They built their own settlements on the Florida frontiers, fought a series of wars, and preserved their freedom, and were scattered across North America. They have played a significant role in American history, but have never received a recognition they deserve. And we're going to talk about the recognition that they should have got when we get to the Black Scouts. So we know that the people that was in South Carolina and Georgia that was on the rice plantations, they are from Sierra Leone and Liberia. The Gullah people. We know the Gullah people became the Gullah people. They are the only people in North America to keep their heritage, their African heritage and African lineage intact, attached, because the slave master was not on the plantation. The Europeans went on the plantation with them because they was scared of malaria and different other types of diseases that was carried on our swamp, that our ancestors was already immune to these uh, diseases on these swamp plantations. So they was able to keep their African heritage intact. We know during the Seminole War, the Seminole War One, the Second Seminole War that took place, we know the Stonewall Revolution that took place, these Gullah people who became the Gullah people in America, and then they escaped and went to Florida because Florida became a safe haven for them. That Spain told them if the African slaves made it to Florida, they would declare them free as long as they was able to help them fight against the British, because British were trying to take Florida away from Spain. So they escaped into what they call St. Augustina. So the Black Seminoles, the people, the Gola people became the Black Seminoles. We're going to get into the word Seminole. I talked about the word Seminole a little bit in the other presentation. All right. Comparing to other Native American Indian groups, the Seminole Indians are a fairly recent origin. During the 17th century in the southern United States, nearly every Indian, not a Cherokee, Choctaw, Chickasaw, was believed to be a Creek. During the 17th and 18th century, the Spain and English was engaged in a struggle for control of the Southeast. The English formed an alliance with the Creeks and encouraged them to make war on the Indian tribes in Florida. After the conflict ended, many Creeks relocated into the Florida area, previously occupied by other Indian tribes, and became known as the Seminoles around the beginning of the 18th century. So the Seminole word is a very recent word, and a Seminole is an amalgamation of yes, they was in the Senegambia region as well. 843 Gala News. Is a recent word, and we know the Seminoles is an amalgamation of the Greeks, not the Greeks, but the Europeans started calling everybody basically that was in Florida Seminoles. The term Seminole is said to be Spanish. Seminole is said to be Spanish origin, derived from Cimarron or Cimarronos, meaning wild or untamed. It is referred to hostile non-whites and Africans whom the Spaniards had to contend with on their frontier. There are no R's in Hitchi or any other Muscogee languages. So when Indians attended to identify themselves as Cimarroons, the R became L, Cimarron became Semaloon or Semaloon. Europeans, they were trying to say they were not Greek. The further complicated matters, the British designed all Florida Indians as Seminole Creeks during the American Revolution. However, the Spanish continued to reference to them as Cimarroons. The traditional founding Indians of the Creek nations were the Coatis, the Cashatis, the Cosasis, the Abikis. When interacting with the whites, they often referred themselves as the Creeks. The Florida Seminole Nation is historically considered part of the 5 civilized tribes, and again, the so-called 5 civilized tribes. And again, those 5 civilized tribes were the Cherokee, the Chickasaw, the Choctaw, the Seminole, and the Creek Nation. These are Indian groups that actually, again, took on the ideology, the philosophies, the way of life and perspective of the Europeans. Again, they married white women. They enslaved our ancestors, and so forth. Encountered European settlers during the North American early colony. Along with the Cherokees, the Chickasaws, the Choctaws, and the Creek, the Seminoles were typically regarded as civilized, and the Europeans gave them the 5 civilized tribes because, again, they adopted the European way of life. So the European already thought they was, they selves were civilized, which they was not. They were barbarians. They was murderers. They was killers, sodomists, and so forth. But they gave them the name, the 5 civilized tribes. By white colonists became the broadly incorporated many European practices within their own respective culture. The adoption of the centralized radical or converting to Christianity during faculty stable relationships between the two groups over the years. Yes, they adopted the Christianity as well. These Indian groups. Excuse me. Excuse me, y'all. The adoption of centralized bureaucracy or converting to Christianity general faculty stable relationship between these groups over the years. The Seminoles developed a robust trading network in colony Florida, which economically and geographically flourished over the course of several decades. In the late 1830s and the early 1840s, the U.S. government moved the Seminoles Negroes to the Indian territory of what is now Oklahoma, which in turn out to be a hostile environment for them. Now, after the Seminole War, the Second Seminole War was considered, as I said earlier, considered to be not the Africans who escaped and the so-called Native Americans war. The Second Seminole War became the African War because they knew that doing them trying to Britain were trying to get in, the United States was trying to war, and the United States did not want these Africans in Florida to be free. So they fought and trained as harder as the Native Americans was. This is why later on you will see that they started to train so hard. They developed all these different types of skill sets, and then later on the United States came back and tried to snatch them up, and which they did to help them fight against what they call the hostile Native Americans, and we're gonna get into that war in a few minutes. But they was so after the Second Seminole War, and they fought for several years with the Seminole War, back and forth for several years in the Second Seminole War, which I said it was the African War, what I'm saying, at that particular time, because our ancestors was fighting harder because they knew once they if they lost, then they would go right back onto the plantation. They would be enslaved, even though they were enslaved in Florida, because the Creeks, the Choctaws, the Chickasaw, the Cherokee, they also owned them. They owned slaves. So as they owned our ancestors, their slavery wasn't as harsh as the European was. Our ancestors had their own, you can say, their own section of land. The only thing that our ancestors had to do was pay tribute to the so-called Native Americans. That whatever they reaped in their harvest, they had to share that with the Native Americans and so forth. But they let us do what we wanted to do, and they also let us marry, because at that time you had more males to escape North Carolina and Georgia plantation then you had females. So you had more African males than you had African females. So at times we would marry with the so-called, they would let us marry with the so-called Native American. But as I explained in the other presentation, this is why we interacted with them in Florida for so many years. We began to adopt some of the Native American culture, far as the wearing clothing, far as some of the other things that the Native Americans did. We adopted, but we also adopted some of the Britain ways, and we adopted some of the Spain ways, because if you go if you go back and look at both of the other two presentations, Spain owned Florida at this time, and Great Britain warred with Spain for that territory. The United States didn't own Florida at this particular time. Spain owned, and Great Britain was fighting for the territory. And one part, Great Britain defeated Spain and took over Britain at one particular time, and they fell fond of the Creek Nation. This is why later on you will see when the Indian Removal Act took place, and they started removing a lot of the Native Americans, and a lot of so-called Native Americans started fighting back. They moved them into another territory, which was Oklahoma. And in this particular time, in being in Oklahoma, the Creek Nation was over the entire Seminoles. The so-called Seminoles, with the Seminoles were what the Europeans or the Spaniards, Spain called those Native Americans that came in, because Spain owned it at that time and made it a free haven for our African ancestors, and for those Native Americans who fled from fighting with the Europeans that came in. So they just call every so-called Native American tribe Seminoles, and or they call them Creeks. And but later on, this Creek, which I explained two other, the Tamaku, the Tamakukan, and another particular group who existed in Florida before Spain got there. But then later on, a lot of things happened with those particular Native American groups, and those Native American groups dwindled down and joined the Creek Nation and so forth. But this is why some of the things that we are saying we Aboriginal or we are Native Americans, because in this particular time, we lived a long time in St. Augusta in Florida with the Cherokee, the Choctaw, the Chickasaw, the Seminole, in the Creek. But the Creek became over Oklahoma, and the Creek treated our ancestors bad. They actually took away our weapons. They let the European come in and pillage the area that we was in, and take us back and put us in slavery. The Creeks did so much. I mean, but the other Native American groups did so much too. Later on, when you study in time what they did with our ancestors, but the Seminoles relocated there. One band of Seminoles and the band Seminole Negroes fled to Mexico. And this is what happened. Our ancestors began to flee to Texas, which are Texas or Mexico, which Texas is nothing but Mexico. So the Gullah people who became the Gullah people in North Carolina and South Carolina and Georgia, and then who escaped to St. Augusta, which is Florida, with Spain, became Black Seminoles. And then the Black Seminoles and some of the Native American groups, when the Indian Removal Act took place in 1830, they was forced to go into Oklahoma, where the Creek Nation was over them, and they treated our ancestors bad. So our ancestors left and fled into Mexico, as well as some other Native American groups that fled with our ancestors into Mexico, or we can say into Texas, into Mexico. And also during the Seminole War, after they lost the Seminole War, the Second Seminole War, for fighting for several years. Again, I told you we was fighting harder than the so-called Native American at this time, because we knew what was going to happen if the Europeans won the war. Eventually, we kept them off for several years, but then once we was defeated, they were so scared to put the Gullah who we call the Black Seminole people now that was in that area, on the plantation, because we had developed this type of warrior spirit, these types of military tactics that will be later more recognized by the United States government. And we're going to come back and you're going to see that Black Seminoles going to develop into the Black Seminole Scouts, the Seminole Freedmen, which are all Gullah people or Gullah people. So the Seminole Negroes stayed in Mexico for fearing being kidnapped, because again, I said their weapons were taken when they got to Oklahoma by the Creek Indians, and the Creek Indians were letting the Europeans come in and rampage what the area that they was in, kidnap a lot of them and take them back into slavery. So they fled into Mexico or Texas at this particular time. The Mexico prohibited, and at this time, Mexico, after Mexico gained its independence, gained its independence from Spain, because Spain owned you could say Texas at this particular time, and they warred, and once they defeated Spain, left, and they gained their independence. Mexico government made a law that they wanted no Europeans to immigrate into that area. So when our African ancestors fled from Oklahoma, now they went into Mexico, and 1829 Mexico had already abolished slavery at this time. Spain was out. They had gained their independence. Spain was out by the time our ancestors made it into Mexico. Thus, the Seminole Negroes were able to leave freely in Texas/Mexico border regions. It was here as young men that they learned to ride, hunt, and track, develop skills needed in order to survive the challenged environments. All right. Now I'm gonna go back to the Seminole War real quick. Following the Seminole War, 1817 to 1818, and 1835 to 1842. We know the first Seminole War was a year. We know the second Seminole War was 7 years. And again, the second Seminole War was the African War. It was not the so-called Native American. And the African War, it was the African War because we had more right on the line because Indians already owned our ancestors. And we could actually put up with that part of that slavery that the Native American, so-called Native American, get it, but we did not want to go back into the harsh slavery of the European. We know what came with them. So some Maroons sought refuge in the Bahamas, and I talked about how some of us went into the Caribbean. We went into the Caribbean when Great Britain won against Spain. If you want more information, just go back to that other video, and I explain how Great Britain won Spain, but then Spain came back and took Florida back over. But during the short reign of Britain being in there, some of our ancestors left and went into the Caribbean, went into the Bahamas, and so far. And then after Spain got back in there, some of us came back into Florida. Bahamas and others were removed to the Native American allies to Indian Territory, present-day Oklahoma. Years later, some of them moved to Mexico, where they descendants known as the Indios Masgagos still live today. So a lot of the Mexicans call a lot of the black Seminoles, they call them the Masgagos, if I'm pronouncing the name right. In the middle 1800s, the Seminoles and many former slaves who had fought alongside them warred against the United States were relocated to Oklahoma and given a reservation. In 1866, the Seminoles in Oklahoma signed a treaty with the United States government. Under the blood Seminoles and the black Seminoles were accorded equal rights. Now, yes, after and I talked about this, and I'll touch on this real quick. After the Emancipation Proclamation came down to 1865, 1866, we know that in Oklahoma, we did have some of our ancestors that stayed. We had a lot that fled to Mexico due to the Creek Indians, who was over the Seminole Indians, which was the Seminole Indians was amalgamation of other Indian groups that the Spain just called all the Native Americans Seminoles, or called them Creeks. And we know that after 1865, when the so-called freed the slaves, they made a treaty with the other five so-called civilized nations: the Choctaw, the Chickasaw, the Cherokee, the Creek, and the Seminoles, that they had to stop slavery as well, because yes, they owned slaves, but everyone stopped but the Choctaw, the Chickasaw, and the Creek. Again, the Creek to me was the wickedest ones. Those was the wickedest ones out of the so-called five civilized tribes who was named by the Europeans, who adopted again the European way of life. They converted to Christianity. They married white women. A lot of the structures, politics, they took from the European and amalgamated into their own society. They own our ancestors as well. They were slaves. So the Chickasaw, and the Choctaw fought for years against freeing. They did not free their slaves, you know what I'm saying, until later on they was forced to free their slaves. So that's why you hear a lot of us run around here talking about I'm from the Cherokee Nation, I'm from the Chickasaw, I'm from the Choctaw, because they owned our ancestors. And I talked about earlier, if a black, in another presentation, if one of our ancestors who escaped the plantation, if they escaped the plantation, those who escaped the plantation, if they married again, you had more runaway slaves males than you had females. So the Gullah people who became the Gullah people in South Carolina, Georgia, who went into Florida, which was a safe haven that Spain told that if they made it there, as long as they helped them fight against Britain, they will always be a safe haven for them, even though you had other tribes that came into that area. But the Chickasaw and the Choctaws, they did not. I mean, but going back to what I was saying, so the marrying, so a lot of our ancestors, they married some of the so-called Native American women. But the only way you was considered a citizen or a member of a certain tribe is because they went off a matrilineal lineage. So if I escaped South Carolina rice plantation or Georgia rice plantation and went into St. Augusta, Florida, and I married a so-called Native American woman from some tribe, let's just say the Cherokee tribe. Once I married that woman and we had a child, I wasn't recognized as a member or a citizen of the Cherokee tribe. My son or my daughter will, because the birth came through the womb of the native. Now, if let's say my sister escaped the South Carolina rice plantation or Georgia rice plantation and went into St. Augusta, which is Florida, that was owned by Spain, and she married a Native American man, and they had a child. Her and the child wouldn't be considered, and she married a man from a Cherokee, let's say the Choctaw tribe. They wouldn't be considered a citizen or a member of that tribe because the birth came through the womb of our ancestors and not through the womb of a Native American. So that's why you will see a lot of these people that saying that they Aboriginals, we the real Native Americans and so forth. This is why, because of this particular time in there. And then if you go back and look at some of the records as after 1865, and you know that a lot of the Native Americans got these reservations, they got tax-free exempt on certain things, they got certain lands attached to the reservation, and some of our ancestors that actually live amongst those people due to being in Florida for that long period of time, or being in Oklahoma for that period of time, or even going into Mexico and going into Texas. We live with these people for a particular time, so we're gonna pick up some of some of the things that these people did, you know what I'm saying, and amalgamate it into our own culture, amalgamate their culture into our culture, and so forth, and so that's why a lot of us think that we are these people. I'm losing my train of thought. Where I'm at, many Seminoles. Hold on, okay. And Seminoles formed slaves who fought alongside them, warred against the United States, were relocated Oklahoma, given reservations in 1866. And let me go back real quick. When we going back to what I was trying to say, because my mind racing. When we going back after 1866, I told you about the Chickasaw, the Choctaw, and even the Cherokee did not want to let go of their slaves, which was our ancestors. But later on, we wanted to get some of those rights. We wanted to be tax exempt. We wanted some land. So a lot of us didn't get none of the land, because a lot of the so-called, if we were the Native Americans, which we're not, a lot of them fought against our ancestors. Those, they are Africans. They are not members. Because again, a member, the only way you can be a citizen or a member of a tribe, it will be through the birth. So if my mother married, if my father married a Native American, a so-called Native American woman, and they birthed me, then I will be considered of the Choctaw tribe, because I came through the womb of a Native woman. So I may have some rights, but my mom, not my mom, but my dad wouldn't have no rights. So a lot of these people that came back to try to get some of the rights that the Native American had, they did not have. Even when they went through trying to prove it through DNA and genetics and all these other type of stuff, they did not have it. The Cherokee, the Choctaw, the Creek, they fought against our ancestors getting some of the land, but we still run around here saying that we Native Americans, we Aboriginal people, because we hadn't did a lot of the studies on how we was encountered by these people in St. Augusta for a long period of time, Oklahoma for a long period of time, Texas, and Mexico. We was owned by the Indians. We lived amongst these people. We escaped to this safe haven together as people. We escaped Oklahoma and went into Mexico and lived amongst amongst each other for a long period of time. The Black Seminoles appear to have lived in relations distinct different from what portrayed by Maluro, the Seminole Freedmen. This traditional interaction between the Seminoles and Black began to degenerate following the forced relocation to the Indian Territory in Oklahoma. The Creeks accumulation consisted of an adoption of the white attitude toward Black relations. In 1861, the Creeks in Oklahoma allied with the Confederacy. We know that that's what they did. The Creeks they aligned themselves with the Confederates. Also, the Chickasaw and the Choctaw aligned themselves with the Confederates. They did not want to let the slaves go, who fought to keep their slaves and southern plantation lifestyles. The term slave, Black, and Negro was used interchangeably, suffer harsh treatments in the hands of slave owners and oppressions from the Creeks, who I said was the wickedest, that's just my opinion, out of all of the so-called Native American tribes in the Indian Territory. They began to contemplate their relocation from the Indian Territory to a place where they could live in freedom. This is when they started to go into Mexico or Texas. In the late 1840s, runaways from the Seminoles, Blacks, and others began to migrate into Mexico. 1850, the Seminole leader, Wildcat Cocucci, and the Black Seminole chief, John Calabro, lead the party Seminoles and Blacks lead the party of Seminoles and Black Seminoles on a year-long journey from the Indian Territory across Texas and into Mexico. And on the journey, John Horse, or who they call Juan Cabello, they was on this long journey. He ended up having to pay $1,500 to continue to succeed, to let them pass and go on into Mexico. So they went through so many different things this year journey just to get to Mexico, to escape the cruelty from the Creek Nation in Oklahoma for being forced to move to Oklahoma during the Indian Removal Act in 1830. John Horse, who led the party of Seminoles, a Black Horse, in a year journey from the Indian Territory across Texas into Mexico. During this flight, the camper near Waco along Lalino River and at Las Moras Spring near Fort Clark and Braxtonville. We're going to get back into Fort Clark and Braxtonville in a minute. They hunted and raised crops impossible for their continuous pursuit by slave hunters. In June 1850, a group consisted of more than 300 Seminoles, Black Seminoles, and a Kikapus, the Kikapus, who had joined the group in Texas, crossed the Rio Grande near the Eagle Pass, Texas. The Mexican government granted the Black Seminoles, and the Kikapus, the Kikapus titles of land sitios in the states of Kahala and provided them with a supply, farming implement, and provision. Because at this time, remember, in 1830, this is 1859, but in 1829, Mexico government abolished slavery. Previous to that, Mexico and Spain warred against each other. Spain owned a part of Mexico. Mexico beat Spain. Spain left and they gained their independence. Mexico the government created a law to stop the amalgamation of Europeans coming into Texas or Mexico, because Texas, Mexico, California, Arizona, Nevada, Utah, all those places was Mexico at one point in time. But we're going to get into how they became other places when we get into the Mexican-American War. But I'm trying to walk y'all all the way back through to some of the prior things of how, who are the Black Scouts. And I had to go back and walk you back through the Gullah people from Sierra Leone, Liberia, who are really from Central Africa, who are Angolians, who are also the Kissy people, Many people, the Bosses, the Keno, who went into South Carolina and Georgia because they had a skill set for cultivating rice, because they owned farms in Sierra Leone, Liberia, for cultivating rice on the swamp plant. So, in the swampy areas. So the Europeans these particularly people from Sierra and Liberia to cultivate rice, because rice was booming in this area at this particular time. And then these people became the Gullah people. These Gullah people The Gullah people became the Gullah people. The slave master only came to the plantation only in the wintertime. They was not, our ancestors was immune to the diseases, malaria, yellow fever, and some other diseases that the European wasn't. So they was not on this plantation. So basically, we ran the plantation on our own without any interference. Every now and then, he would send somebody to patrol in there just to see if we was doing what we supposed to be doing. But we did, even though we wasn't comfortable. We revolted. When you go to the Stonewall War, which I showed you the Stonewall War, I gave you a primary of actually the I can't think of the individual who started the Stonewall War. That was his great grandfather, and he gave an account of the stories that was told by his father. So I gave that matched up with another account primary that I gave that cooperate with that Stonewall story, as well as the Seminole War 1, the Seminole War 2. And we know that the European defeated us after several years, and they were scared to take us on a plantation, so they moved us to Oklahoma, where they already had started moving a lot of the Seminoles and the Native Americans to Oklahoma due to 1830 of the Indian Removal Act at this particular time. So then they became the Black Seminoles when they got to Florida. So they went from the Gullah to the Gullah to the Black Seminoles, and then 1867 they became Seminole Freedmen, and then we know they went into Mexico due to the harsh treatment, and then later on they began to become the Black Seminole Scouts or the Negro Scouts, and they're going to help out the United States because of the skill sets that we had that we mostly developed when we was in St. Augusta in Florida, fighting so we can stay out of slavery from the European trying to come back in and take us back into slavery. So the Mexico gave us a land at this. They gave us Kahini and some of the Native American tribes, the Kikipu tribe, and another group. But eventually they're going to leave, and we're going to stay in the Mexico. And then we're going to, once the United States come and notice us and ask us to come and help, we're going to leave, and we're going to go help the United States out. I don't know what for, but we went and helped them out. With supplies, farming implements, and provisions because of the reputation of the fierce fighting horses and expert marksmen. So, hold on. The Mexican government granted the Black Seminoles, and the Kikupus titles to the provisions because their reputation as fierce fighters, we was fierce fighters, horsemen, and expert marksmen. And the Black Seminoles and Seminoles were obligated to the Mexican government to provide protection from the Indian raids along the Mexican northern border, because they had the Apache tribe that was trying to get into Mexico that was attacking them. They had the Kakupu tribe that was trying to get in and attack the Mexican government as well. Before the contact with the Europeans, the Kikipu lived in northwest Iowa and southern Michigan in the area between Lake Erie and Lake Michigan. Beginning in 1640, the Algonquin tribes in the region came under attack from the east, first by the Ottawa and the Arakunrin speaking neutral, and then the Aricos. And I may be pronouncing these names wrong, but please forgive me if I am. By 1658, the Kikupus had been forced west into southwest Wisconsin. About 700, they began to move south into northern Illinois, and by them folks do not look nothing like us. So, so please stop, y'all. Just please stop with the nonsense. About 700, they began to move south into northern Illinois, and by 1770, have established themselves in central Illinois, near Perrero, extended southeast into the Waspa Valley of the western border of Indiana. After the after wars with the Americans and settlements of Iowa Valley, they signed a treaty during 1819, ceding the remaining land east of the Mississippi River and relocated to the southern Missouri, 1819 through 24. Initially, most moved into the land as assigned with them, but many remain in the central Illinois. And I'm talking only reason why I'm giving you a little bit of information about the Kikupu tribe is because these are one of the tribes that actually went into Mexico with the Black Seminoles. So I just wanted to give y'all, and I'm not going to read all of it, just give you, now I'll keep it paused here for a minute. These people was actually from Northwest Iowa and Southern Michigan. And we know that these people, they migrated and went to the other places, and then they escaped and they went into Florida and then eventually into Oklahoma, because we know during that time they was attacked. They was also being attacked and was trying to be removed from their land by the European as well. So this is how they came in. So how they came in contact with our ancestors. I'm not going to read all of this, but just wanted to read some of this, let y'all know exactly where these people come from and what these Indians look like. All right, the group originated, settled in the land of south of Pedro Negros, Mexico, enjoying being free people in Mexico. However, the peaceful extent was soon destroyed by a greed of slave hunters and a series of error judgments committed by the Texas Ranger captain. Okay, so let's go back. So we had a group of people before I even go any further. All right, you had the Texas Revolution that dropped off, that jumped off. During the time when Spain had it, and going back to Spain, Spain was defeated. Mexico gained their independence. They stopped letting immigrants, Europeans, come in, but then they started letting this individual that his name is escaping me own a piece of land, and they did this for a reason. And he started bringing in other Europeans. These people became the Texans. They did not want to be governed by the Mexico government. So these people rebelled, these so-called Texans, or these Europeans that came into so-called Texas at this time, rebelled against the Mexican government. So this Texas Revolution jumped off. Texas was not even a state, what even recognized as a state. So the revolution jumped out first. I had to call him back. Sorry about that. I had to call him back. But so these so-called Texans revolted, and they had a revolution, and they gained their independence just in what we call Texas, this area. So later on, the Texans wanted to be recognized by the United States. So they sought after Andrew Jackson, the other president after him, I can't even think of his name right now. The other president after him, they rejected him. They did not want any problems from Mexico government. They didn't want no problems. So they rejected it until you got a president after him, John. Can't even think of the European last name. Really don't care what his last name were. And then you had Polk, the President Polk, who came later, who acknowledged them and accepted Texas as a state of the United States. So now Texas now is a part of the United States. And this, well, I'll get back into that because I'm getting ahead of myself. I think I got on the slide. If not, I go back and explain, because I'm trying to get y'all to explain, because all these different wars that was taking place at this time, trying to get y'all to understand why the Black Seminole Scouts was so important, was because of these wars that I'm talking about that took place. A lot of these wars that took place, and a lot of things that happened when the Seminoles, the Black Seminole Scouts, was recruited by the United States government to come. So I'm just trying to paint a picture and give y'all the understanding of these wars and how these wars took place and how important our ancestors were to this war. Judgment committing by the Texas captain. In 1855, the Texan treasures was dire straits. The state called for rangers to take to the field, supplying their own weapons, ammunition, and horses, and a state legislature promised pay sometimes in the future. Indian raids along the frontier prompted the formation of the approximately 6 companies of Texas Rangers. One of the first organized was commanded by Captain James Hughes Callahan. On the scout near Eagle Pass, Texas Captain Callahan Company encountered a band of men led by William R. Henry. Henry was a slave hunter who claimed to be a former ranger, which he was not. Actually, he was a soldier of a fortune who was willing to fight on either side of the Rio Grande on defeat of the La Rama by Mexican force aid by the Black Seminoles and the Seminoles. In order to cover their escape and plunder, Callahan ordered to burn the Pedro Negros as a result of the unwarranted action, Government EMPs dismissed Callahan from the Texas Ranger Service. Following this raid to forcefully remove them from their freedom, the Black Seminoles realized they had not escaped the continued efforts of slave hunters, because that was the whole purpose of them leaving out of Oklahoma, because the Creek Indians were so harsh to them and took away their ammunition and their guns away from them as they were removed, as well as other Native Americans moved into the Oklahoma area due to the Indian Removal Act, also due to what they call manifest destiny, where the United States wanted to expand their territory and spread religion, their policies, capitalism, and so forth. The Mexican government feared a breach of the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, which I explained earlier about this treaty with Mexico. After the revolution, Texas Revolution, the people that called themselves the Texans actually gained their independence from Mexico because they did not want to be up under the Mexico government. And then later on, they was rejected. And then the president Pope offered $30 million to the Mexican government to buy California, or what was called California now. And son, go in the back and stop playing. California and New Mexico. And the Mexican government rejected it. They did not want the money. They did not want the land, because at this time we're talking about Indian Removal Act and Manifest Destiny. United States trying to expand their territory. So they rejected. So Andrew Pope raised war against Mexico. So the American and the Mexican war jumped off for 2 years. And this was a bloody war that jumped off between America and Mexico. Mexico fighting to keep their land. Now Pope wants all of Mexico. But you had a guy named Andrew Tristan that went in behalf to negotiate this treaty that is called the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo. And this treaty was, okay, we fought for 2 years. This was a bloody war. We want peace on both sides. But Andrew Twist went in to negotiate on behalf of the president, Pope. But Pope wanted all the land. He didn't want just California, this piece of land of California and New Mexico at this time. He wanted more, but Twist wanted peace. So he negotiated this thing where they was finna bring in another guy. The president was finna pull Twist out and bring another guy that was going to be straight up for what Pope wanted, the so-called President Pope wanted at this time. So Twist negotiated this treaty with Mexico and America called the Guadalupe Hidalgo, which is I may be pronouncing it wrong. So this treaty was for peace, and they gave them California, they gave them Utah, they gave them New Mexico, they gave them Nevada, they gave them Arizona, and another piece of land, which became, I think, 522,000 square miles. One of the biggest expansion at that time that the United States had got. And they did the Mexican government did this to keep peace, because the war had got so bloody. And the war had got so bloody, and America had spent so much money that by the time Pope was ready to be run to be reelected, they did not even want to reelect him because the war was so bloody. He had spent so much money in those past 2 years on the war. Oh, shoot. All right. The Black Seminoles had tracked the land of Haciano, and so they was in. Let's go back. So when we went into Mexico, and they gave us Pedro Negazos, and then due to a lot of the slave hunters started coming into Mexico, we thought we was good when we was in Mexico, but you got slave hunters that came in, then they burnt that place down. So Mexico was in fear of the treaty being broken because they was having our ancestors, so they moved them into another place after Pedro was burnt down, and they moved them into the Nascimentos. And you will hear them pronounce some of our ancestors as the Nascimentos, Black Seminoles. This is when they was in Mexico, in this region that the Mexican government gave them after they burnt down the first place that they was at. a land at the Hacienda de Nascimento, located at the interior of Rio San Juan Sabina. They formed a community called Nascimento at the headwaters of the rivers northwest of Mesquite, Coahuila. One leader of the Black Seminoles in Mexico said, "We came fleeing slavery. Mexico was a land of freedom, and the Mexicans spread out their arms to us." The Mexican government officially began to refer to the Black Seminoles as Mascagos. So you hear that our ancestors had, the Mexicans call it the Mascagos, the Black Seminoles, who are the Gullah people, who the Gullah people are the Gola people. They started calling them Mascagos, and terms still used today to descend the inhabitants of Nascimento. Upon their arrival in Coahuila, the Black Seminoles discovered that they had been preceded by a group of Black Creeks, mostly of the warrior wisdom. Upon the arrival of Coahuila, the Black Seminoles discovered that they had been preceded by a group of Black Creeks, mostly in the warriors and Wilson family and a family of Biloxi Indians. These groups eventually joined and became a prominent part of the Black Seminole community, and by 1861, all of the Seminoles had returned to the Indian Territory, ending an alliance with the Mascagos. So the Mascagos again are the Black Seminoles, the Mexican was calling the Black Seminoles, the Mascagos. So the Caquipo tribe, and some other tribes, native tribes, went into Mexico with our ancestors, but then in 1861, they went back to Oklahoma, and a lot of our ancestors stayed in Mexico. 1870, the native Seminoles were living in a reservation in the Indian Territory, but originally they came from Florida, right? Before the United States government banned slavery in December 1865, several hundred Black freedmen escaped their masters and sought refuge among the Seminoles in Florida. Not long after the Seminoles were removed to the Indian Territory, the Black Seminoles, as they went to Coahuila, Mexico, to escape enslavement. They were welcomed by the Mexicans and later joined the native Seminoles, Black Creeks, and Black Cherokees. In 1870, the United States Army issued a message to the Black Seminole chief John Horse, who I told you earlier he was the leader of the Black Seminoles at this particular time when they left, fleeing from Oklahoma due to the harsh treatments of the Creek Indians, taking away all of the Black Seminoles' ammunitions, and a lot of other things that they took away from them once they got to Oklahoma. The Europeans let the Creeks be over them in Oklahoma. Again, the United States government came up with the Indian Removal Act and removed a lot of the Indians into the territory of Oklahoma. They gave them Oklahoma. So he led them out. John Horse led them out along with the Kikupu chief and other natives into Mexico. Him and his band came back into the United States to enlist in the Indian Scouts and help fight the hostile Native Americans. The Black Seminoles, about 200 people, accepted the agreement, believing that they would be granted land in the United States, food and provision, as well as reimbursement for traveling costs. Though over the years, none of these conditions were met. So they left, the Black Seminoles left out of Mexico back to help the United States of what they call the hostile Native Americans. These groups, these Native Americans who were still fighting for their land, did not want to leave their land because the United States was trying to expand their land with the Manifest Destiny or the Indian Removal Act. So, they said it was deemed by God to expand the land, to spread their religion, their politics, capitalism, and so forth. So the United States Army had sent a message to the chief at the time of the Black Seminoles. And they had already recognized the skill sets of the Black Seminoles. They were master marksmen, they were master horsemen, master riflemen, and so forth. And they developed these skills more when they was in St. Augusta, Florida, when they was fighting in the Second Seminole War, because they knew that the Europeans wanted them back in slavery when St. Augusta was a free town that was sanctioned by Spain for them to come into that area to live, to help them fight against Britain, because Britain was fighting against Spain to take Florida away from take Florida away from Spain at this particular time. So they had this skill set and they was recognized by that. So the United States government said, okay, if y'all come back, we're going to grant y'all, we're going to give y'all land. We're going to give y'all food, all types of provisions. We're going to reimburse y'all for traveling back here. We're going to, you know, so all of these things, these conditions, they was left out for dry. And it goes back to what I was saying about us saying that we Aboriginals or we the Native Americans, when a lot of the we adopted a lot of their way of life by being with these people in Florida, by being with these people in Texas, by being with these people in Mexico. We live with these people. These Native Americans owned us as slaves. So this is how, you know, we adopted the Indians' way of life, and we was not even considered members or citizens of these groups unless a male slave married a Native American woman and they had a child. He wouldn't be recognized, but the child would be recognized as a citizen of one of the tribes. But even some of the Seminoles later on, after all this stuff transpired, they still wasn't granted land. Remember the Native Americans, they got on these reservations after 1865, the Macapaza Proclamation. They got tax exempt. They don't pay taxes. They get grants. They got these grants and all these other types of things. So now the Black Seminoles, our ancestors that lived among them, oh, we want the same things. You know, we Indian, we this, we that, we live with them. And the so-called Native Americans fought against them early on about trying to get land and get on the reservations and be tax exempt and get all these other different types of benefits that they was getting. And then the Scouts was the same way. Y'all, hold on one second. I'm gonna have to call you back. I'm live. All right. Bye, son. Get your stuff together. Your mom on her way. Sorry about that, y'all. My son's mother coming to get him. Well, let's get back into it. But I'm just trying to paint a picture, like I said, leading up to the Black Scouts. So I hope y'all follow me. And I hope this information is informative. I hope y'all appreciate the information. Thumbs up the video. I may be off on one of these things. I only see 3 thumbs up. You know, I mean, you don't have to thumb it up. We just asking to thumb the video up. It's easy to find the video if you thumb the video. I mean, if you're enjoying the information, you know, thumb it up. You know, if you're not enjoying the information, thumb it down. I take the thumbs down too. So the Black Seminoles, about 200 people accepted an agreement, believing that they would be granted land in the. Well, I already read this, and we'll get more into that. The future Scouts crossed the international borders of July the 4th and were officially mustered into service on August the 8th at Fort Duncan near Eagle Pass, Texas. So now they back in Texas. The first permanent commander was Lieutenant John Lipham Bullis, and they respected this white European. I mean, he wasn't, you know, he treated them pretty fair. He treated them pretty well. So, you know, they did anything for this man here. Which was a white Quaker from New York State who had been an officer in the 180th U.S. Colored Infantry during the Civil War. Lieutenant Bullis eagerly accepted assignment in 1873, and despite his inexperience in dealing with Indians, the 32-year-old officer quickly proved his mastery in the situation, succeeding by gaining the respect of his men by undergoing privations in a field with them and looking out for their needs and their families. The Scouts saw most of their actions under Bullis, who recognized their exceptions, toughness, skills, and characters. He also recognized their skill set, how tough they was, how many skills they had, you know, and the character that our ancestors, the Black Seminoles, had. And again, the Black Seminoles are nothing but the Gullah people from South Carolina and Georgia, and the Gullah people are nothing but the Gola people from South Carolina. I mean, from Sierra Leone and Liberia, who are originally from Central Africa, Angola, or Ndongo. Because Angola, if you go back to my other presentation, which I'll talk about that tomorrow. John Horse. Now, this was the chief at this time. This is the United States military. This is who they contacted in Mexico. And again, you can see here, we lived amongst them, so we adopted, some of the things. We adopted some of their dress wear. So you can see some of our ancestors was actually wearing, some of the things that the Native American. We have been with these people for so long. I'm maybe 60. I'm gonna say about 60 years we have been amongst these people, living amongst these people, and it's no different than me going to New York. You know what I'm saying? I'm from Mississippi. So, we talk differently than people talk in New York. We do things different than the way people do things in New York. We eat different than the way people do in New York. We treat our people different than the way people in New York treat their people. So if I moved and went to New York and I stayed in New York for 10 years, you're going to hear me talk about done son. I might be wearing Timberlands, you know what I'm saying, baggy jeans, the big jackets, you know what I'm saying? What up, God? What up, done son? So it's no different than what we doing today. Son, your mom outside. That's how you walk like this. Pull your Gatorade, pull your Powerade off there, purple Powerade off of there. The second one? The purple Powerade. Excuse me, y'all. Get you one off of there, son. What's up? Right. Can I spend that with you next week? Yeah, you come back tomorrow if you want to. I'm back. Excuse me, y'all. I'm trying to get my son situated for his mom. Okay. All right, love you. You better be careful in this weather. All right. So John Horse, also known as Juan Calabo, Juan Kawa, or Copper John. John was the dominated personality of the Seminoles Maroons. After affairs in half a century, he counseled Seminole leaders, served as an agent of the U.S. government, and became a Mexican army official. And again, we served in the military or in the army when we was in Mexico. Mexico abolished slavery in 1829. We didn't come fight for the United States until 1870. They recognized us. We came from Mexico and we went back into Texas to help fight against the so-called hostile Native Americans at this time. But we helped protect Mexico too, because you had other groups, the Apache tribe, the Camuchu tribe, and other Native Americans trying to attack the Mexican government and take that land as well. So we helped them on their home front as well, because they let us stay there. They gave us our own land. We was able to do what we needed to do. He served as a Seminole Maroon, as a warrior, diplomat, and patriotic, and represented their interests in Washington, D.C. and Mexico City. He fought again in the United States, and the French and the Indians survived 3 wars, 4 attempts of his life, and his gas of slave hunters. Little was known about John Horse earlier, but by 1826, he was living in his owner's village near Tampa Bay, Florida, during the Second Seminole War, 1835 to 1842. It's gonna matter. He was living in his owner village near Tampa Bay, Florida. During the Second Seminole War in 1835-1842, he initially led the Maroons against the U.S. force in Florida, but offered a promise in freedom. He agreed to surrender and relocate west of the Seminoles in March of 1837. By 1840, John Horse had married a Suzanne Julie, a daughter of a Seminole Maroon guide by interpreter. Fearing that the family and his fellow Maroons would re-enslave Horse, entering into an alliance of disaffecting Seminoles, and he did marry a so-called Native American woman. Gazing from the train windows, you may be able to imagine traveling through this wide and beautiful part of the country in the 1870s. The long expansion of blue skies and rolling prairies where Apaches and the Comanches Indians controlled the land. The United States, and these are the same 2 tribes I was talking about, that was actually going into Mexico, attacking attacking Mexico, taxing the Mexican government, and so forth. And a lot of the Black Scouts served as in the army in Mexico due to Mexico abolishing slavery and giving them land to live there. Remarkable tough resources group expert trackers helped the U.S. Army against their fellow Native Americans. And again, this was one of our expertise too. Not only horse riding, not only rifles and so forth. We was trackers, and we also, like I said, we also, due to earlier, you may have more male slaves that may have escaped than male slaves. So we did marry some of the Native American women, and they actually helped us too. I think I got a slide with one of the women in a picture with them being in Fort Duncan, where these Fort Scouts was at this at Fort Duncan in Texas, after they came back from Mexico. Came from Mexico into Texas. In 1870, the U.S. Army established the Seminole Negro Indian Scout. So the Seminole Negro Indian Scout was established in 1870, who were recruited from communities in Mexico. They had the skills the armies desperately needed, such as excellent horsemanship, as I've been reiterating, great tracking skills, and were outstanding marksmen with the rifles. Who were these first raiders? Marksmen and trackers. They were descendants of escaped slaves who settled among Florida Seminole Indians and intermarried. And this is what I've been trying to establish with these series. The Gullah people, the Gullah people, or the Gullah people. The Gullah people are from Sierra Leone, Liberia, or specifically from Central Africa, the Angolians and the Dango area. The Black Seminoles are the Gullah people who escaped the rice plantation in South Carolina and lived amongst these other different Native Americans who the Spaniards just called them Seminoles or called them Creek, just bunched them all together. And the Gullah people became the Black Seminoles. And then once they left and went into Texas and Mexico, and then the United States wanted them to come back to Texas to fight these hostile Indians because they had these skill sets that they did not have. They became the Black Seminole Scouts, or the Seminole Negro Indian Scouts, who were recruited from communities in Mexico. They had skills in the army that separate needed, such as excellent. I already read this. They were descendants who escaped slaves who settled among Florida Seminole Indians and intermarried. Apache Chief Costello and his daughter Teresa on May 8, 1873, Renard Mackenzie led 34 Black Seminoles and Lieutenant John Lehan bullets on a surprise attack on the Indian village of Romillo, Mexico, which had defeated and burnt to the ground Black Seminole Scouts, Renty Grandson, Rope Chief Costello. Several Indians were captured, and one was Teresa, which is this woman over here. I don't know which one it is. I don't know if it's this one or this woman here. Don't make me lie. This is the chief. The chief's daughter. She and the chief made their home in a jackal on the compound of Fort Clark. They was first in Fort Duncan, then they was moved to Fort Clark in Texas. And they, doing the Black Seminoles helping when they attacked this village, they captured some Native Americans. They captured the chief and his daughter, and later on, the daughter would marry one of the Black Scouts. And she, I think this was her, the daughter. She became a helper in tracking other Indians during this war. The daughter chief made their home at Jackal in the compound at Fort Clark. Teresa married a Black Seminole Scout, Jane Perriman, and assisted the Scouts in several occasions of trackers. And again, the Scouts were master trackers as well. In 18, and I'm almost about to bring it home. In 1873, the Secretary of War, William M. Belknap, and General Philip Sheridan went to Fort Clark for a secret talk with Mackenzie. it was decided that the colonial would lead a punitive expedition across the border to fight the Lipan, and the scouts will guide the way. On May 17, 1873, Colonial Mackenzie crossed the border into Coahuila. This was the place that they in Mexico that the Black Scouts were, where they were in Pedro. And then after the slave hunters came in, burnt the place to the down, they was moved to another relocation with the scouts and attached to the 4th Cavalry. Then fought a successful skirmish against the Kikupo Raiders at El Remino, forced the Mexican army to keep from intervening, and then hastily returned to the fort. During the Red River War, a notable engagement occurred on September 19, 1874, when 3 Black Seminole scouts and 2 Tekawawa scouts were sent out by Mackenzie to search for enemies. During the journey, the 5 men were ambushed by about 40 Kawawas. The only option was to try to fight their way out and escape. Details and engagement are unclear, but a scout, Adam Payne, was awarded a Medal of Honor for risking his life to save the others. Under fire, Payne engaged in the Kawasos, allowing the other 4 men to get away. Eventually, Payne's horse was shot out from underneath him, but he was able to kill one of the attackers and take his horse. Payne was decorated for his horrible courage. Thought there is no evidence that he had ever received the medal himself. So he was rewarded the Medal of Honor. Supposedly rewarded the Medal of Honor, which I'm gonna talk about a few others that was awarded the medal. Black Scouts, there were Black Seminole Scouts that was awarded medals, but this was during the Red River War. And the Red River War was a military campaign launched by the United States Army in 1774 to remove the Camacho, the Kawawa, and Southern Chimney, and the Apache Native American tribes from the southern plains of the forcibly relocated. And these were some of the tribes that they was trying to remove. This was a reason why they recruited the Black Seminoles to come from out of Mexico, because we had these skill sets to help the United States fight against this so-called hostile Native American tribe that was fighting. And the Camacho tribe that was from the Great Plains and from the Canada Parish gave these folks hell, as well as the Apache tribe as well gave the United States hell. Tribes from the southern plains and forcibly relocated them to the reservations of Indian Territory. Lasting only a few months, a war had several army columns crisscross the Texas Panhandle in an effort to locate, harass, and capture highly mobile Indian bands. Most of the engaging were small skirmishes in which neither side suffered many casualties. The war wounds down over the last few months in 1874 as a few and fewer Indian bands had stretched and supplied the remaining fields, though the last significant size groups did not surrender until the mid-1870s, and the war marked the end of the fear-roaming Indian population on the South Great Plains. The most famous engagement of the Seminole Scouts happened on April 25th. Now, this is 1875, a year later, near where the Highway 90 now crossed the Pecos. Lieutenant John L. Bullis and 3 of his scouts had tracked a group of 25 to 30 Indians for 4 days, catching up to them as they crossed the Pecos rivers with a herd of about 75 horses. The scout dismounted and crept undetectable to the position within 75 yards of them. Bullets identified the Indians as the Camacho, and again, these people gave them hell. These Native Americans, Indians gave them hell, and attached, killing 3 and wounded the 4th. After being pinned down for 45 minutes, the Camacho seized up the scouts' location and numbers, flanked them, and counterattacked. Bullets ordered a retreat, and the scouts returned to their horses and withdrew. They soon realized Bullets was not with them, and the horse had spooked before he could mount it, and the Comanches were now closing in on him. The scouts returned to rescue him, braving heavy gunfire and considerable risk of their lives because they was way outnumbered. Considered risking their lives. A trooper, Pompey Factory, trumpeter Isaac Payne provided cover fire. Sergeant John Ward rode to where Bullets was trapped and pulled him up onto the back of the horse, saving his life. Soldier Ward, Factory, and Payne were each awarded a nation highest commendation for value of combat and Congressional Medal of Honor. So these were some other guys that actually got the Congressional Medal of Honor as well. John Ward, this is one of the guys that they was talking about. 1847 to 1848. This is the individual here. This is his picture. Was a black Seminole who served as a United States Army Indian Scout and received American highest military decoration, the Medal of Honor. His action in the Indian War in the Western United States. Having lived in Mexico for the past 2 decades, Ward enlisted in the U.S. Army in Fort Duncan, Texas in August of 1870. This is where the United States recruited and joined other black Seminoles known as the Seminole Negro Indian Scouts. On April 25th, 1875, it was serving as a sergeant in the Indian Scout attached in the 24th Infantry Regime by the Pecans River in Texas, where with 3 other men, he participated in a charge against 25 hostiles while on a scouting patrol. A month later, on May the 28th, 1875, Ward was issued a Medal of Honor for his action during the engagement. 2 of the other men who took part of the charge, Pompey Factory, Isaac Payne, both black Seminoles, also received the Medal of Honor. Here was another individual right here, Isaac Payne, another individual. Those 4, those 3 that was there with the European over them. I can't even think of his name at this time. Isaac Payne, it's a picture of him. Isaac Payne, 1854 to 1904, was a black Seminole who served as a United States Army Indian Scout who received American highest military decoration, Medal of Honor, in his action in the Indian Wars of Western United States. Payne and the other black Seminoles enlisted in the Army October 1871 and became known as one of the Seminole Negro Indian Scouts. April 25th, 1875, he was serving as a trumpeter by the Pekin River, Texas, where within 3 other men, and that's just saying the same thing in the middle of what's the name that I said in the other slide as well. Payne was discharged in January 1901 and moved back to Mexico, where he lived until his death at the age of 49 or 50. He was buried at the Seminole Indian Scouts, Braxtonville, Texas. This is a place where the Seminoles actually relocated and had, and I'll talk about that in a minute. Pompey, this is Pompey Factory, 1849, March 29, 1950, was a black Seminole who served as a United States Army Indian Scout and received American highest military decoration, Medal of Honor. This was another individual. After having lived in Mexico for previous 2 decades, Factory and other black Seminoles joined the U.S. Army Negro Scout, saying the same thing as was I was saying in the other slides. Okay, this is Adam Payne. This was the first individual that they said that may have received his Medal of Honor. There's doing the red, what was the red? Well, let's go back and see where it was. The Red River War. This was the Red River War. This was the first individual. I don't have a picture of him. But Adam Payne, 1843. This is his tomb headstones right here, and it's basically saying the same thing. He was black Seminole, rewarded, the honor, Medal of Honor so far. 1875, recruited, blase, some of the same thing that went on. Let's see, Payne was shot, but he was shot to death in New York, New Year's Day, 1876, by a fellow Medal of Honor recipient, Clarence A. Withers, deputy sheriff of Braxtonville, Texas, who was attempting to arrest Payne as a murder suspect. Payne died at the age of 33 or 34 and was buried at Seminole Indian Scout Cemetery in Brackettville, Texas. The United States Army recognized the skills the Seminole Negroes could bring to the military. Although they never numbered more than 50 men, the Seminole Negroes were some of the best troops. They fought in the varieties of military campaigns with highest praise from their commanders, officers. For the Scouts received the Congressional Medal of Honor, and the bravery the Scouts amassed an impressive record in frontier combat. Meanwhile, these soldiers and their families faced discrimination, racial violence, and government indifferences. The First Army fed, and housed the Seminole Negroes, and many were led to believe that the government would resettle them on a reservation. Listen to this, but that never happened. And again, remember they was promising them land, promising them food, other different things that they came to fight, even though they did grant them land with them being in Fort Braxton. But after they completed the mission and did certain things, they was going, but the whole purpose was to give them, to reestablish them on these reservations. They had already gave these so-called Native Americans tax exemptions, grants, land, and other different things. So they lived amongst them, and they called themselves Seminoles, but Black Seminoles. Um, they thought that they was going to be able to be granted these lands, but again, I told you the Native Americans, and we was a part of the Native American societies, or we was members of these tribes. You know what I'm saying? Then we will be granted, the land. We will be granted these benefits, but we were not granted these benefits and so forth because we're what? We are African descent. We're not of Asian descent. So Negro Indian scouts receives uh uh believe that they will be the government will resettle them on the reservations, but that never happened. Despite the harsh treatment the Seminole Negro Indian scouts received from civilians and the government to maintain a high level, and they still were being disrespected by the civilians, even though we came from Mexico to help them fight in the war against these so-called hostile Native American Indian tribes that they could not defeat. So they needed us to come in because we had these certain types of skill set, and the people still treated us bad. The government at the end of the day still gave us the short end of the stick. And if it wasn't for us, you know what I'm saying, they probably wouldn't have won some of these dang wars. They were loyal to the Army and proud of the contribution to the United States. Originally, the Army classified the scouts as the Indians, and thought they could be settled in the Indian territory. See, originally the Army classified the scouts as Indians and thought that, and they are the one that gave them the Seminole Negro Indian Scouts, the one that gave them the name. The Europeans, the United States government classified them as Indians because we lived so long amongst the Indians, and we was enslaved by the Indians for so long as well. They started calling us Indians. That's why we call ourselves, a lot of us say we are Indians when we're not Indians, even though we live with them. And again, we adopted some of their way of life. But again, we were the Africans who came here from Sierra Leone and Liberia specifically to cultivate the rice plantations in South Carolina and Georgia. And then we escaped and went into Florida or St. Augusta that was owned by Spain, and other groups came, and the Spaniards was calling them the Seminoles. They started calling everybody Seminoles and Creeks. And then we was forced into Oklahoma. Then we went into Mexico because the Creek Indians took away our ammunition and other things away from us, treated us harsh, as well as they treated some of the other Native Indians harsh that went into Mexico with us. But then those Native Indians went back into Oklahoma. We stayed in Mexico, and the government sought us because we had all these different skill sets to help them fight the war against these hostile Indians. So we came and served in the United States government army, but ended up getting a bad end of the stick again, as I said. But the Indians questioned the authenticity. Some mixing did occur between the Black Seminoles and the Seminoles, but the Black Seminoles had always maintained their individual separate identity. The ensuing battle between the Army, Indian bureaus, and Department of the Interior left the Black Seminoles without unfulfilling treaties. So we got the ass end of the stick because the Army, the Indian bureaus that was fighting against us, and the Department of the Interior left the Black Seminoles without unfulfilling treaties. So they did not fulfill none of the things that they said they promised us after we did what we supposed to done. Here, just an inscription. This is an inscription of the Seminole Negro Scouts. And I don't know if you can see that good. If you can, I got it on this side. It's just an insignia of the Indian warrior. It just says USS, which is you see the crosses here. The United States Scouts, the United States Army Force Service, indicating along the top of the markers. On the middle part, it just says father, son, brother served side by side. Each new generation became scouts. Soldiers and scoutings came naturally to these men who quiet, proud, dependable performance of havable courage made them perhaps the most distinguished auxiliary unit in the United States Army history. But you don't hear a damn thing about the Black Seminole Scouts nowhere in the United States Army history. You don't hear them talked about. A lot of us don't even know who this. And I'll be honest, I didn't know who they were until I started doing a correlation of the Gola people in Central Africa who went into Senegambia, the Ivory Coast, who went into Sierra Leone and Liberia, and then traced them to South Carolina and Georgia, who became the Gullah people and then became the Black Seminoles and then the Black Seminole Scout. I knew nothing about this until I started doing some research about 2 months ago, and I just been doing just certain installments on it. And here, I'm not going to read all of this. This is just another marker here, the United States Scouts, Seminole Negro Indian Scouts Detachment, Mustard Roll. This is just a roll of lot of the people that actually were a part of the Black Seminole Scouts. These are all the names and the dates that was on here. Here is another one of you. This is another part of the roll. This is a lot of the names. You can go back and look at it if you want to read the names out later on in the dates. You can go ahead and do that. Here is another one. This is a roll of a lot of the people that was a part of the Black Seminole Scouts. Here's the thing right here in Fort Clark. This is where they were stationed at. They was in Fort Duncan at first. Then they moved them into Fort Clark. So this is where they was. This was where they was at. Where they was when they were serving in the U.S. Army military. This is the Seminole Negro Indian Scout detached marker. This is all the signs that I showed you, the markers that I showed you on each side here and here. Here is my references right here. And again, like I said, I don't have a problem with you critiquing my information. I don't have a problem with you scrutinizing my sources. I won't get in my feelings. You know, critique is good. You know, personally to me, it only makes us better. If you do it in a productive manner, you're not doing it to stroke your ego. So if you're trying to do it to stroke your ego, I'm not going to hear you. But if you coming on some humble stuff, trying to show me where I made an error, I have no problem with it. But don't come to me with no crazy and no funny business. I don't do that. I'm sorry I wasn't able to keep up with the chat. I wanted to try to interact with the chat and see what was going on. See some of the comments that was in the chat. I'll look at some of the comments real quick before I get up off of here. I hope the information, y'all appreciate the information. Again, I just wanted to try to walk y'all through it before we got to the Black Scouts. So I wanted to talk about Spain warring against Mexico. Talk about the Mexican-American War, talk about the American Revolution. I mean, not the American Revolution, but the Texan Revolution gained their independence, the people that were the Texans, how Texas became a state and was recognized. It was rejected, how much Polk offered $30 million to buy California, what is land, California, and what's the name? Then he wanted the whole land. Talk about the treaty that took place. Talk about our ancestors coming into Mexico, how they ended up in Oklahoma, how they ended up in Florida, how they ended up in South Carolina, Georgia, where did they come from, Sierra Leone and Liberia. So I hope this presentation, served its purpose. I appreciate y'all for rocking out with me. I'm trying to look at some of these things. Indians the laws passed as far as Indians and African unity played a part and what have the Geechee, y'all need to have us speak. We are still alive and can. I mean, I am King Sosa. Man, I would love, if you still on here, brother, I would love to have you, bro, on my platform, Kofi Piesie TV, or on the Mossi Warrior Clan channel. We can do it on any channel, man. Go to my go to inbox me, man. Inbox me or follow me on Facebook. And matter of fact, I'm gonna text my cause you and cause I got a lot of Geechee and Gullah people, man, that be hitting me up, man, since I've done these presentations. 8434 Gullah News. Peace to you two, brother. I want to speak to y'all. I want the people to hear y'all side of the story too. I'm gonna put my email address in here, man. Hit me up. Both of y'all hit me up. And brother, whenever y'all available, to come on, I can do one at a time, man. Email me right there, or you can look me up on Facebook. Mossi, we don't have a Facebook page, so you can either go to, that's my email address, or you can just look me up at on Facebook, Kofi Piesie TV. So look me up on Facebook, but that's my email address. And bro, please do, because I do want to talk to some of y'all. I talked to Darius Brown. I think that's Darius Brown, 843 Gullah News, that's on here. So a lot of Gullah people, Gullah and Geechee people, are starting to follow me, and they be inboxing me, man. And please, brother, hit me up, man, and so I can have you on either one of the platforms, man. And like I said, I just had to walk y'all through these wars to get y'all to the point of who the scouts were, and even reiterate the other two presentations. Again, appreciate that. Sorry I wasn't able to really interact into the conversation, leave out important information. But when you separated the Africans from the native, you leave out important information. Played an important role in this story. Yeah, that's why I need to have you on, man, so you can talk, man, for sure. Appreciate y'all time, man. We need to build communities and business with our Gullah and brothers and sisters. No doubt, we need to, man. That's why, man, I'm trying. I hope this connect with some of the other people, and I can have some other people on the show and we can talk. But please definitely hit me up, man, and we can have a show ASAP whenever you're free, and you can come on and we can build about the Gullah and the Geechee culture. With the Gullah and the Geechee are the same people. The same people. I talked about that. Who was the Gullah presentation when I talk about the Piesie and the Gola people who migrated out of Central Africa. The Gullah, they say, is a rendition. The Gullah is a rendition of the Gola, and the Piesie is an addition of the Geechee. So I go into all of that on the other thing, man. So again, man, peace. Appreciate y'all all for looking and checking it out. Before I get out of here, I am a member of the Successu Ma'ani Metanetic group. Also, we are a group of like-minded people who study the language, which is called the Rani Kemet, and the writing script, which is called the Seminole Nature. So please subscribe to our channel. We have a lot of content on that channel. Also, please subscribe to Kofi Piesie TV. That's my own personal channel. It's been up, like I said, a few months, 6, 7 months. I said 7 months, but I think it's only been 6 months. The channel is growing. I appreciate the support. Please support me. Please go and subscribe to the channel. I have a lot of content, a lot of information on there. I call it the channel that takes the black man, the black woman, black child, Eurocentric mind, Africanize it. It is also the African Netflix channel. So anything you want to know about the culture, the traditions, you know what I'm saying, it's on there. I don't care. Whatever you want to know about the culture and the tradition, it's on that channel. Also, please subscribe. I am also a member of the Mossi Warrior Clan, which y'all on now. So please, if you haven't subscribed, please subscribe. Hit the notification bell. Please support us. Anytime we put anything out, please support us. Give us feedback. Even after we gone, come back and you can come back. If you got any questions, put them in here, and we'll definitely get back with you with any questions. So please subscribe and support. Please subscribe and support. Please subscribe and support. Tomorrow I'll be back, but it won't be on the Mossi channel. It'll be on the Kofi Piesie channel. I'll be back at 6 o'clock Central Standard Time. I will be doing a presentation called the Mbongala. The Mbongala people is is the fourth installment off of my Congo series. So if you hadn't looked at the Kingdom of the Congo, if you hadn't looked at the Portuguese in the Congo, if you hadn't looked at the Warrior King of Ndongo, Queen Azinga, all three of those presentations are linked together. You will understand Central Africa and those kingdoms of the Congo. What are the kingdoms of the Congo? Then you will understand who was ruling at that time. You will understand when the Portuguese came in, the slave trade that jumped off, because we did have ancestors that went into slavery from Central Africa. I know we talk about West Africa a lot, which majority of us come from West Africa, but you had a few numbers that came out of Central Africa. So I talk about slavery, how some of us sold our own people to, but I explained what it was and how we treated the people, what we call indentured servants. They own land. We let them. They own their own land. They could marry. The only thing we had, they had to work off their debt, and once they worked off their work, they can actually integrate in a society or leave and go home. It wasn't treated harsh, you know. And then we gave some of our criminals away. But I'm not going to explain. Just go and watch that presentation. And then Warrior Queen of Ndongo, she is actually kin to the king that actually started trading with the Portuguese. So all those three presentations are linked. And I talked about the Mbongala people and the Warrior Queen of Ndongo presentation. So this will be the fourth installment going into the Mbongala. So the Mbongala, y'all may not like the Mbongala, but I wanted to talk about the Mbongala because I mentioned them a little bit in the story because they played a role with the Portuguese against the people in the Congo of Ndongo, or what we call Angola today. So stay tuned for that presentation. I'll be doing that tomorrow at 6 p.m. Central Standard Time on Kofi Piesie TV. So if you haven't subscribed, please subscribe and hit the bell. I guess seeing June, not seeing June, but my brother Sean Iniaret California might be next to do something on the channel. I'll be back in probably a week and a half, maybe 2 weeks, to do another presentation on the Mossi. I don't know if y'all got something else in mind that y'all want me to do for the Central Africa, North Africa, West Africa, South Africa. Just hit me up and I'll put something together because I don't have anything else in mind on what I want to do. But the next 2 weeks after I do this Mbongala tomorrow, I'm going to be writing my first article, which is going to go in Brother Ben's journal. So if you want your article to go into an African journal by my Mossi brother Benjamin Njai, hit him up on Facebook, submit your article to him so it can be put into his African journal, which will be coming out at the top of 2019, if I'm not mistaken. So I'm going to be working on that and then reading a few other books that I need to get out the way, and I'll be back. But I'll be back tomorrow with that presentation in Mbongala. So stay tuned for that. Sean, before I jump out of here, man, you got anything to say? If you're still on, you might have jumped up off here. I can't see nothing.
No, I'm good, man. Appreciate everybody tuning in. Spirits are flying through those accounts.
That's a fact.
Man, subscribe to the channel. Share it with like-minded individuals. Help us build up this channel as we are trying to liberate the African mind and change the and change it one person at a time. So we need your help as we continue to put forth information, and we'll see what we have in store in the future as far as what I got going on. I'm gonna wait till the last minute this time.
All right. So on that note, I want to just say Madupe. Madupe just means thank you. Moriri means appreciate. So I appreciate y'all for tuning in. And on that note, I'm out of here. Mossi Warrior Clan up.
He called for the unity and the redemption of the African world. Salute them honorable mark. We are not ready to listen then. They might not have been ready then. There's wonder whether we are ready. Ain't no doubt about it. To listen. We ready, baby. Nah. Let's go. Yeah. Flag fly high, flag fly high, flag fly high. Black fist to the sky, breaking side to side. It's the flag fly high. Come on. Flag fly high, flag fly high, flag fly high. All these G's on the rise, all eyes will recognize the flag fly high. Hold it high, let it fly. Rebel colors forever, Garvey would never die. On my 90, the throne ready, let's take a ride. Cash won't fix me and don't choose a side. This is the path for the warriors. Seldom travel yet still bad glorious. Yeah. Black power represents us. You either rolling with Africa or against us. Flag fly high, flag fly high, flag fly high. Black fist in the sky, breaking side to side. It's the flag fly high. Come on. Flag fly high, flag fly high, flag fly high. All these G's on the rise, all eyes will recognize the flag fly high. The red is for the blood. I got the best stock, the rest got stood. The black is for the gods, melanated and elevated, holding the main charge. The green is for the cradle, Africa, everything first, the earth's navel. This excellency, put it together, every symbol of liberation. That's how we get the letters RBG. Flag fly high, flag fly high, flag fly high. Black fists in the sky, breaking side to side. It's the flag fly high. Come on. Flag fly high, flag fly high, flag fly high. All these G's on the rise, all eyes will recognize the flag fly high. Been flying high since 99. People army them no time. I was drab on my design, we roll ready. Hard line, ain't no game for that red flame. Triple stage of that black pain. Revolution in my veins, if we free, I won't change. Then you can count on that like an abacus. Celebrate the victories and the challenges. This deeper than social media, the statuses. This lifestyle, elevation building practices. Yeah! Flag fly high, flag fly high, flag fly high. Black fists in the sky, breaking side to side. It's the flag fly high. Come on! Flag fly high, flag fly high, flag fly high. All these G's on the rise, all eyes will recognize the flag fly high. Red, red, black, green, RBG about that red, black, green, that RBG about that red, that black, that green, RBG about that red, black, green, that RBG, baby. RBG, baby. Fly high, flag fly high. Shout out to all my RBGs worldwide. Doing this thing garbage style, you know what I'm talking about? Yeah. Flag fly high, flag fly high. Come on. Flag fly high, flag fly high, flag fly high. RBGs on the rise, all eyes gonna recognize. Flag fly high. Black power. Oh, it's so familiar. It's so familiar.
Still flying high.